The first snow has started to stick on Chernobyl. For authorities, this proves the sarcophagus is airtight, at least for 30 years, or so they predict. The liquidators have gone home. Reactors 1, 2, and 3 are back up and running. The first Battle of Chernobyl has ended in a victory that heralded the end of the USSR. But for many, it also marks the beginning of a war that 20 years later still hasn't ended. For the hundreds of thousands of atomic refugees, as for the hundreds of thousands of veterans from the Battle of Chernobyl, the fight against their invisible enemy hasn't let up. Everyone who went to Chernobyl is still suffering from the radioactivity their bodies absorbed. In the months following the accident, the liquidators flooded into hospitals all over the Soviet Union. 20 years later, those who are still alive continue to frequent hospital number 6. They're all victims of what specialists have since named the Chernobyl syndrome.
We've all got a bunch of symptoms: heart, stomach, liver, kidneys, nervous system. Our whole bodies were radically upset by the metabolic changes caused by radiation and chemical exposure.
These men weren't even 30 when they were sent in to battle the atom. Today, the survivors are not yet 50 years old, but they struggle like senior citizens. According to the military, of the 500,000 Chernobyl liquidators, 20,000 have already died. 200,000 are officially disabled.
Во-первых, по здоровью, не знаешь потом, сколько проживешь, и от чего ты умрешь.
You don't know what effects it will have on your children, if you have any.
Если дети зарождаешь...
We know all that. And we know the invisible enemy is eating away inside of us like a worm.
Как окажется. Понимающие это понимают.
For us, the war continues. And little by little, we're slipping away from this world.
Врагом продолжается. И они потихонечку отходят.
Yet for 2 decades, only 59 deaths have been officially attributed to the Chernobyl disaster. Not a single study has been carried out of the 130,000 refugees from the zone. Not a single statistic on the state of the 500,000 liquidators. No figures on the population that continues to live around Chernobyl and in the contaminated areas. The real amount of radiation these people were exposed to has never been revealed to them. The United Nations recently reported an increase in rare childhood thyroid cancer cases, but it found no evidence of higher birth defect rates that could be tied to the accident. Some charities and environmental groups disagree, citing local data that showed much higher rates for various deformities and developmental abnormalities in newborns. Since 2001, the 3 Chernobyl reactors have been shut down once and for all. But 20 years after the explosion, a dosimeter flies off the chart at the base of the sarcophagus. High levels of radioactivity 100 times above normal are still contaminating the plant's surroundings. The structure has been weakened by rain and erosion. Since its construction, 3,000 liquidators have been watching over it, trying to ward off damage.
We built the sarcophagus to last 30 years, thinking that 30 years after the explosion, we could build a new sarcophagus without people having to run because of high radiation levels. 20 years have gone by, and nothing's been done yet, and it's urgent that it gets replaced. But the Ukraine doesn't have any more money. Neither do we.
A new sarcophagus is underway, but its construction is already 10 years behind schedule. It is a structure 350 feet tall, meant entirely to cover the first sarcophagus. It will cost $1 billion. An international fund, led by Hans Blix, has been set up.
We still have not put the new sarcophagus on it. It will be ready in a couple of years' time. When that is done, well, then they can, in due course, later on, remove the masses of spent fuel or of melted fuel which is there.
20 years after the explosion, the cooled magma at the reactor's core, nearly 50 feet underground, is still a terrible threat and will remain so for years to come.
I pray God the sarcophagus never collapses. That would be the worst thing that could happen, because inside there are 100 kilograms of plutonium. 1 microgram is the lethal dose for a human being. That means there's enough plutonium to poison 100 million people. The half-life of plutonium, in other words, the time it takes for half of the plutonium to disappear, is 245,000 years. This is something we could thus consider eternal. There are areas where there will never be life again.
Despite this terrible warning, interest in nuclear power appears to be increasing once again. In the US, more than a dozen utility companies hope to build new nuclear plants to meet increasing energy demands and to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.